It was a busy couple of weeks between the Monaco and Canadian Grand Prix. Ronald Reagan visited the small village of Ballyporeen in County Tipperary in Ireland, from where his great-grandfather Michael Reagan had emigrated in the 1840s. Bruce Springsteen released his seminal seventh studio album Born in the USA, the first album manufactured on CD in the United States. The same week, horror comedies Ghostbusters and Gremlins were released, both proving instant hits and classics of their genre. In India, previous weeks had seen tensions rising between the Sikh community in the Punjab and the Indian authorities, who feared that Sikh separatists were receiving funding and training from Pakistan in an attempt to destabilise the area, not least because the Soviets had fabricated documents showing CIA support for Pakistan to do exactly that. Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi sent in troops to raid Sikh temples and assess how good the training of the militants was. There were insurgents there, and they were well armed, but there were also many innocent pilgrims, and the resulting firefight in the Golden Temple at Amritsar killed an unknown number, with accusations flying on both sides that the rebels had used them as human shields, or that the Indian army had executed those trying to flee. Amritsar had been the site of an infamous massacre of Indian civilians by British forces in 1919, and the Sikh community in India and across the world was shocked by the scenes. Tensions continued to rise in Britain too as the miners' strike continued. 120 people were arrested on the 7th of June after fighting broke out during a demonstration by miners outside the Houses of Parliament, while Joe Green, a 55-year-old miner picketing Ferrybridge power station in Yorkshire, was crushed to death by a lorry. He was the second miner to die during the strike, and 15,000 miners attended his funeral. All this was set against the background of new figures showing the unemployment figures at an all-time high of 3.26 million. Only during the Great Depression of the 1930s had a higher percentage of the workforce been jobless. In France, the 1984 European Football Championships kicked off on the Friday before the Canada race, with the host nation opening the tournament with a cagey 1-0 win over Denmark, courtesy of their influential midfielder and captain Michel Platini. With just 8 teams making the trip to France, reigning world champions Italy had failed to qualify, many of their best players having retired in the intervening 2 years. While all this was happening, the F1 teams packed their suitcases for a month on the road, as the 3-race North American tour got underway, beginning with the Canadian Grand Prix at Montreal. The race clashed with the Le Mans 24 Hours, and both Jonathan Palmer and Mauro Baldi stayed behind in France to race there, meaning there were 2 new faces on the grid in Canada. For Ram, New Zealander Mike Thackwell, and for Spirit, Dutchman Hub Rothengatter. Corrado Fabi also continued in the second Brabham, with Teo at Portland, Oregon with his IndyCar team. Brabham had a new nose-mounted oil cooler, which gave the car a unique look, while Mark Sura had elected to continue in the Ford-powered Arrows, which he found much easier to drive than the turbo version. And with the controversy from Monaco still rumbling on, the FIA issued a statement that the results would stand as declared regardless of what else may transpire. Mike Thackwell was born in Auckland, New Zealand in 1961, the son of an importer of racing and sports cars. Perhaps inevitably, he was involved in motorsport from an early age. The family moved to Perth, where he won the Western Australian Kart Championship at 14, then moved to Hong Kong, where he won karting titles the next 2 years running. At 16, he moved to the UK to join the Dunlop Star of Tomorrow Formula Ford programme, came third in his first year, and moved straight into British F3 in 1979. He simply wowed in F3, scoring 5 wins and 4 more podium places in his maiden season, finishing third overall behind Chico Serra and Andrea de Cesaris, and ahead of the likes of Nigel Mansell, Roberto Guerrero and Alain Prost. With such results, it was hardly surprising that the March team snapped him up for their 1980 Formula 2 campaign. Results were a little tougher in F2, but he put in a series of great drives, often hampered by unreliability, to end the season 8th overall. So impressive was he that Ensign offered him an F1 seat midway through the season, but he turned it down, feeling he wasn't quite ready yet. However, later in the year, Jochen Mass suffered a nasty accident, and Thackwell was offered his seat as a temporary stand-in at Arrows, and he couldn't say no a second time. Mike didn't qualify on that occasion. Being parachuted in last minute is never ideal, but he didn't disgrace himself either, and noted talent spotter Ken Tyrrell gave him a third chassis for the last 2 races at Montreal and Watkins Glen. So it was in Canada that Mike Thackwell became the youngest man ever to qualify for a Formula 1 Grand Prix at just 19, and he did so at the expense of reigning world champion Jody Scheckter, who failed to qualify for the race. Unfortunately, Thackwell was involved in a start line accident that saw the start scrubbed and couldn't make the restart, and at the next race he broke a brake disc in qualifying, and that was that. He'd done well, but not well enough to earn a full-time drive for 1981, so he continued to hone his craft in F2 instead, now with the Works Ralt team. A huge crash at Thruxton left him on crutches and struggling for results, and he was dropped by the team for 1982 over fitness concerns. He returned to the team in 83, partnering Jonathan Palmer, and won once with 8 more podium visits, though Palmer did better. With Jonathan moving into F1 with Ram, Thackwell began 1984 in dominant style, won the first race and came second by just 0.53 seconds to his teammate in the second race, and was recommended by Jonathan Palmer as his stand-in at the Canadian Grand Prix to have his second attempt at F1. Hubertus Hube Rothengatter was born in Hilversum in the Netherlands in 1954 and was interested in motor racing from an early age, taking a series of jobs to finance his hobby. He got his start with Fritz van Amersfoort's racing team in Formula Ford, then moved into F3 in 1977, driving a privately entered March in both the European and German series. His results weren't stellar. He scored no points in his first year, having all his best races at non-championship rounds, though they steadily improved, and he moved up to F2 and bought himself a Tollman chassis. He won at Zolder and finished 7th overall in 1980, but it wasn't enough to secure an F1 drive, and he continued to tread water in F2, never truly sparkling, but doing enough to keep his personal sponsorship coming, though he did on one occasion take out a full-page advert in De Telegraaf asking for sponsors. Finally, in 1984, and somewhat out of the blue, Spirit contacted him to replace Mauro Baldi, who was away racing at Le Mans, and he would finally get his shot. Not everyone was convinced he had the quality, though. Reportedly, Niki Lauda was asked about him and replied, "Who, Rattengott?" That's God of the Rats in German, an ironic fluff from Nicky the Rat himself. Patrick Tambay tried a couple of tentative laps in the Renault, but decided against trying to race, so the entry was just 26 cars at Montreal, meaning that both new boys were guaranteed to qualify as long as they set a time, which they duly did in 24th and 25th places, with Thackwell faster than teammate Alio to the tune of 1.6 seconds. At the front it was Piquet on pole and Prost alongside. De Angelis went well again and was disappointed to miss out on a front row start late on, while Warwick would start the sole Renault on 4th. The Ferraris were on row 3, then Mansell and Lauda, and Monaco hero Senna 9th alongside De Cesaris. Williams continued to struggle, with Rosberg 15th and Laffite 17th, sandwiching Fabi's Brabham, and Stefan Beloff, the other Monaco hero, could only manage 22nd, the Montreal circuit not suited to the atmospheric engines. Race day was warm and sunny, and the parade lap went off without incident, and then it was time to go. Derek Ongaro hit the switch, the lights went green, and away they went, with Prost squeezing Piquet out into the lead, followed by De Angelis and the Ferraris, with Warwick crowded out and dropping to 7th behind Mansell. If Prost thought he was going to once again disappear off into the distance, however, he was disappointed as Piquet surged back past partway round lap 1. Behind the leaders, Alboreto and Arnoux both got past De Angelis in fairly short order, while Warwick had retaken 6th from the other Lotus. Behind Mansell, Lauda led Senna, De Cesaris and the rest of the pack. Mansell was dropping back rapidly, losing several positions over the initial few laps, while De Angelis was likewise being left behind by the Ferraris, who were sticking to Prost's gearbox. The Renault engine boys had advised their teams, Ligier, Lotus and the Works team, to turn the boost down to ensure there was enough fuel to last the race, and it looked like it was going to be a tough race for anyone with a Renault in the back. Taking advantage of this was Niki Lauda, who was surging forward and had got up to 5th ahead of De Angelis by the end of lap 5. As the Austrian pulled away in pursuit of the leaders, De Angelis and Warwick were having a cracking battle over 6th. Piquet was now starting to ease out a lead over Prost, who still had the two Ferraris sticking to him like a sweaty t-shirt, at least until Alboreto's engine gave up on lap 11, while Warwick finally found a way past De Angelis into what was now 5th place, and Ghinzani joined Alboreto and Eno in retirement. On lap 14, Arnoux came in for new tyres, having already ruined his own, which promoted Lauda to 3rd behind his teammate. With Brabham's consistent reliability problems so far in 1984, it was shaping up to be another McLaren 1-2, though Prost was losing power at higher revs and not really challenging Piquet, which allowed the Brazilian to husband his engine a little more. Arnoux, meanwhile, on fresh, soft tyres, had made his way back up through the field and was soon past De Angelis and Warwick, but couldn't make any headway on the McLarens, while Piquet lapped teammate Corrado Fabi, who was having a cracking battle with Thierry Boutsen in the Turbo Arrows. Piquet led Prost by a steady 4 to 5 seconds, with Lauda third and catching his teammate. Arnoux was fourth, then Warwick, De Angelis, Rosberg, Mansell, Senna and Cheever, the latter two having a terrific off-camera scrap. As the race approached half-distance, there was a flurry of retirements. Mike Thackwell's F1 return lasted 29 laps as he went out with a turbo failure, followed 2 laps later by Lafitte with the same problem, and Rosberg a lap after that with a timing system malfunction, while Rothengatter was in and out of the pits at least twice with an unidentified engine problem, though he was able to keep going. Perhaps more worrying for Piquet, though, was that both Corrado Fabi and Thierry Boutsen dropped out with BMW engine failures shortly after half-distance. Lauda had now caught up to Prost and was tucked up under his teammate's wing. Off-camera, Alain simply moved over and waved Nicky through, knowing his engine was still not quite running right. No such team spirit at Lotus, where Mansell had caught De Angelis and was trying hard to get past, while Elio blocked and weaved and was determined not to give place. Piquet lapped the pair of them, and when Mansell finally did find a way through, De Angelis celebrated with a bit of impromptu rallycross, nearly T-boning Lauda when he rejoined the track. Released from behind Elio, Nigel set off at a race of knots and began to catch up with Arnoux, who'd dropped behind Warwick again, until Derek came in on lap 54 with a suspected puncture, only to find that the new tyres were no better, and he came back in to retire, further investigation revealing a damaged undertray. Mansell got past Arnoux for fourth, only to develop gearbox problems and drop behind both Arnoux and De Angelis, while Piquet continued in the lead, only a couple of seconds ahead of Lauda, with the pair pulling away from Prost. The expected BMW engine failure never materialised though, and Piquet was able to bring his Brabham home for his first win of the year, his first points of the year indeed, just 2.5 seconds ahead of Niki Lauda in second. Prost was third, and De Angelis took fourth in the dying laps after Arnoux' Ferrari slowed with a broken exhaust, and Mansell took a frustrated sixth place. Senna came home seventh, Winkelhock took his and ATS's first finish of the year in eighth despite losing his clutch on the last lap, and Alio chalked up his first F1 finish in 11th. Rothengatter trailed in, 14 laps down and unclassified, but still running in his first race. As soon as Piquet arrived back at the Parc Fermé, he knelt down and stripped off his right racing boot. The nose-mounted oil cooler had caused some pretty nasty burns. It had not been a classic Grand Prix, a trifle dull if the truth be told, but Piquet and the Brabham team wouldn't mind. It was probably a little late now to mount a serious title defence, but Bernie's boys and the neutrals alike would be hoping they could ensure McLaren didn't have things all their own way for the balance of the season. There would meanwhile presumably be a full and frank exchange of views in the Lotus garage, and another post-mortem of a disappointing race in the Williams pit. But neither had long to work things out, as the next race in Detroit was just a week away.